I'm Riley,
And I'm Ronnie,
and this is the Plan to Eat podcast.
where we have conversations about meal planning, food, and wellness to help you answer the question, what's for dinner? Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Plan to Eat podcast. Today's interview is with Meera Keshav. She is a personal chef. She currently works in Newport Beach, California. She's originally from San Diego, and we're so excited to talk to her today.
Our conversation with Meera was just so down to earth. She talks about her culinary journey, how she became a chef. We also talk about a ton of tips for recipe ideas and how to make your recipes better and how to make them taste like the way they tasted at a restaurant, and even some awesome kitchen tools that she uses for everything. This was a excellent episode for the home chef, but also for if you're a more professional chef. There's just so much content here, and we can't wait to share it with you. And we hope you love the episode.
Meera, thanks for joining us on the podcast today. We appreciate you taking the time to be with us.
Thanks for having me. All time zones included, early or not. Happy to be here.
Awesome.
Thanks.
We're happy to have you. Yeah. So let's jump right in. Why don't you talk to us about who you are and what you do?
I am a private chef in the Southern California area. I'm from San Diego, but I live in Orange County now. I work for a investment company. It's just sort of an odd thing to say when you say private chef, but I work for this firm that is really lucky to have a kitchen in their office with a bunch of executives to make lunches for the whole staff every day, about 20 people. Yeah, and I love it. I used to do restaurants, used to do families, and I came across this job like in the end-ish of the pandemic, and it became my permanent spot for now, at least. So
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you have a team or is it just you?
it's just me. I have a manager sort of that runs the office, and she's really great. She helps me out, but for the most part, it's just me. Yeah, we're lucky we have two dishwashers, so like not physical people dishwashers, but machines. So that's really nice. So everybody is kind enough to they rinse their dishes and put them away. But yeah, otherwise it's all one man show.
Yeah, that's a really unique job.
It is. It's hard to
Yeah.
explain to people sometimes. I've gotten the hang of it in the last year that I've been working there, because before I was like, I'm a chef, but I work for, when people ask me what I do or where do I work, and I'd be like, investment firm. They're like, so you're a banker? Like, what do you do? I get used to saying, I'm like, no, I'm a private chef, but I work here. Hard to
That's awesome.
navigate, but
So
it's
do
really
you have a particular type of food or cuisine that you are a master in, or is it kind of all across the board?
master is a strong word. I don't even think you could ever be really a master, except maybe sushi, because people train really long time for that.
Well, yeah.
But I trained in a couple different cuisines besides going to culinary school. I trained in an Indian restaurant for 6 months. It was sort of a modern mixed cuisine Indian, so it wasn't all from one area necessarily, but it was definitely out of your ordinary chicken tikka masala sort of place. I trained in Italian and Mediterranean, and then I also worked for a paleo keto kind of place in San Francisco. So I got sort of a whole gluten-free belt going, as well as some of the other stuff. I definitely had a lot of people that want healthy eating. And being Indian and loving that cuisine, it's really hard to be healthy when you eat Indian food. So I would say that would be my area that's most, sort of like the in Asian cuisines, but a little healthier is sort of my area. Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm a master anywhere though. There's always
What's your-
room to grow.
What's your favorite? Which one is your favorite?
Ooh, it's definitely still Indian food.
Yeah.
Yeah. I actually never grew up making it. I always grew up eating it, and I love to cook, but that seemed like a pretty hard, leave that to my grandma and my mom area. So I switched to learning it eventually, and I was like, now it feels so proud to know how to do this. And still, I think it's not as good as theirs sometimes.
Man, I say this all the time, Ronnie. Food is such a nostalgic thing for people. I say
So
it.
much.
Oh man, I think I've said it every podcast the last
Yep.
6 months. But it doesn't really. It's like your mom and grandma making it. It has so much more to do with. I mean, it might taste better because there are things that my mom makes that certainly taste better. My grandma for sure. But there's just so much attached to it, with your heart, that I think that
Absolutely.
that it just tastes better because your
Makes a
heart's
difference.
involved.
Yes. There's one of my favorite books that I love to read. It's called like Water for Chocolate.
Mm.
And this woman, like, she when she cooks and she's really sad, people taste the sadness in her food and they cry. And then when she's happy, it's like the most amazing meal they've ever had. And it's sort of, it seems like magic when you're reading it, but then when you think about it, you can sort of feel it. Well, when someone's really down, when I cook when I'm not in a good mood, people are like, it wasn't that good today. And when I'm in a great mood, it's like, this was the best meal today. Like, this was so good, even though I've made that 100 times before. So definitely, what you put into it is what you get out of it. And that's a big thing besides even nostalgia, which makes a difference too. So
Yeah.
Right.
It's funny that you say that because when my husband hears this podcast, he's going to be like, see, I told you, you've got to put love in it. He
that's an
always says that because
ingredient.
for my husband, love means more butter, more like how like it always tends toward like it's like if I made something healthier, like the love that he's
Just don't
talking
have
about
enough.
always goes in the other direction. So, but I mean, it does make things good. So,
I think there's a whole scientific area to be explored about. I mean, people make good food, but sometimes good food means like the Michelin star chefs that use the most expensive ingredients from the fanciest place, versus like, at home we used canned beans to make whatever it is we made and it was still fantastic. There's is it the food? Is it where it comes from, which is so important with farm to table and all that, versus like what are you putting in it from what yourself, and your soul. I'm sure there's a whole scientific research that could be done about that.
there you go. There's your second career.
Mhm. That sounds like a good area, actually.
Yeah,
Not
it would be
thinking about that.
really cool to explore that.
That's so true though, because, a lot of the time you go to like a quote unquote greasy spoon restaurant and you're like, this
Mhm.
is the best food I've ever had,
Diner food is
and
the
then,
best.
yeah. And then you can go to, like a really fancy restaurant and be like, it was great, but,
Mhm.
you know, maybe sometimes the diner food is a little bit better. And maybe it also depends on who you are as a person, but
I don't know. I had a conversation like this with my sister recently. Like my favorite food, probably to this day, is still grilled cheese. And you could be like Wonder Bread with Kraft Slices grilled cheese, or it could be like the fancy sourdough with the really expensive $10 cheese you bought at Whole Foods with all the expensive Irish butter. And like still those are two pretty amazing things separate on their own, but still grilled cheese, right? Like where does that go? And when you weigh you know, like it's just hard to say, but they're still amazing on their own
Yeah.
right.
well, and I would think that I would say that some people would actually prefer the, like, Kraft Singles version of that. Like, they would be like, "Don't give
Sure.
me any fancy
Yeah, I
grilled
just
cheese
want
over here." Like, I
Mhm.
grew up on the Wonder Bread and the Kraft Singles. Maybe that's
That's where
nostalgia
it's
again.
at.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. I actually think that's important when people ask me about recipes is to say like, because a lot of people stress out about like, I don't have that one ingredient. Is it going to turn out the same? There's always a substitute for everything, but the reason why recipes are hard to give to people in my mind at least is that I don't always have the same stuff on hand when I make that recipe every time. And it's hard to convey to people sometimes when I really try to be like, it's okay, it's still gonna turn out all right. What you have in your kitchen is still gonna be great, and that's what makes it your own.
Mm,
And that's how, originality is like, there's no originality sometimes in this world. We have so much stuff going on all the time. Social media makes everything common in like a heartbeat. So what makes it your own is what you put into it, right? What you have on hand makes it special and yours.
Yeah, there's actually, it's just ringing true with me because there's times when I'll make the same recipe that I've made
Mhm.
forever. And sometimes it's amazing. And sometimes it's just kind of like, oh, it was fine.
Mhm.
But I think that that's so true. Is like, because I just I'm very okay with winging it if I
Mhm.
don't have the thing or trying something new this time. And I'm
Yep.
really bad about writing it down, but really good at doing it. And so it's like it's just the trying the different things, or like maybe
Mhm.
one time I pureed it and the next time I didn't, and that
Mhm.
makes a recipe totally different if you pureed something versus not. It's like
Yep.
chunky versus yeah. And
Absolutely.
yeah, so I love that you're saying that.
In my short period of time, between college and actually becoming a chef in culinary school, and always loved to cook even at home. I didn't have a food processor, and that used to stress me out like crazy. I was like, "How am I gonna chop this? How am I gonna make salsa, hummus? Like, what am I doing?" even the blender, I was like, it doesn't do it the same. Like it used to so stress me out. And I had to just be like, work with what you have. That's what makes you a good cook. And that's what just makes it more fun. So you're not worried about all that stuff, how it's gonna turn
So
out.
yeah, so what made you decide to become a chef?
I always really loved to cook. Even when I was a kid, my mom loves to tell this story about how my favorite restaurant was Benihana's. And because I just wanted to watch the guy cook the whole time, even though I never ate anything, I was super picky as a kid, oddly. But yeah, I just always loved it. And I always used to say I want to be a chef. And there was a short span of time. My dad's a dentist. I used to be like, I want to be like my daddy. I want to be a dentist. And then I realized people's mouths are gross, and I just couldn't go into that. But yeah, I was just always on that. And then many years ago now, it was really, really hard to be a chef. It was just, a really tough life and didn't make any money. And it's still not easy necessarily, but it wasn't a path that I was really like set to just choose. So I was like, maybe I'll be a pharmacist. Maybe I'll go into food science. I did college for a first year, regular 4 year. And I was like, yeah, I can't do any of these things. And my dad at the end of it was like, if you really want to go to culinary school, like we'll help you go and you should do that. Cause I worked at restaurants all through my 4 years of undergrad college and I just loved it. And I had a chef tell me, he gave me my first kitchen job in LA. And he was like, if you really want to do this, you have to really, really, really love it. Like you have to love being here all night long. You have to love like really being hot all the time and then cold all the time, standing at the quote unquote smoke breaks, even if you don't smoke, when you're standing like next to the dumpster in the back, you have to love the whole thing. And so I did it. I was like, okay, I'm going to go in and I'm going to try it. And it was rough for the first month or so. And then I was like, no, actually, this is like a weird energy high that I can't get away from. I love learning about food, being around people who love it all the time. And so I was like, this is for me, for sure. And yeah, I just stuck to it. I was like, once I made the decision, I was like, nope, I'm going to commit. I'm going all the way. So
I love that.
I love that too. Yeah, I worked in I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but I worked at a restaurant for 7 years before I started working
no.
for Plan to Eat, and I was in the front of the house. But
Mhm.
there is kind of an energy about working at a restaurant, particularly when you work in an environment where everybody gets along really
It's
well.
long. Mhm.
Like it is kind of a special environment to be a part of. I lament the fact that a lot of times people who work in restaurants are like viewed as maybe like a little like lower class or something because
Yeah, me too.
because we all love to go out to eat, right? But that was hard sometimes to feel like people were maybe judging me by working in a
Yeah.
restaurant.
I think culturally too, like, being from an Indian family, it was like, why are you gonna shoot for like the lowest level? And to me, it was
Mm,
like, no, the best thing we do is cook together and sit around a table. That's what we do all the time. Like, imagine if I could make money doing this, that would be fantastic. And I never saw it that way
yeah.
because I love to go out to eat,
Yeah,
always since I was young.
who doesn't, right?
Yeah.
Um, the thing that really stood out to me about that is that your dad was so supportive.
Mhm.
And that resonates with me because I went to school for photography and my
Mm.
dad is an engineer. And I have a lot of engineer relatives,
Mhm.
PhD relatives. And in some ways, I felt like it was hard, like for him to say that. But at the same
Yeah.
time, he wanted to support me in what I wanted to do and what my goals were for my life. And so I always have really appreciated that my dad did that for me because he could have very easily pushed me into something else or tried to steer me in a different direction. And instead he supported me in that. And so I love that your dad was like, no, we'll help you do this. You should do this.
Yeah. Him and my mom both. It was literally like the tail end of my first year of college. I was doing so poorly. And he was like, if you want to do this, he's like, you have to decide now. And I was like, at that point, I was like, if I don't finish a degree of any kind now, like the 4 year, I probably won't go back to it. So I almost dropped out to enroll in culinary school. I'd filled out the application and everything. And I was like, no, I'm going to finish a business degree because I always wanted to own my own place at that point. And I was like, "No, I'll go to culinary school afterwards." He's like, "If you still wanna go, you should still go." And then I graduated just, like, a semester early so that I could enroll in culinary school after that.
No, that's
And
awesome.
yeah,
And a business
you're awesome.
degree background is
I
perfect for you.
I still come from a family that's like, "No, 4-year degree is important, you need that."
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what mine was too, and
Mhm.
that was, like, almost the compromise for my dad
Yep,
was, like,
exactly.
you can do this, but you need to be a 4-year
It's like,
degree.
"Well, you need to be educated in something else in case."
Yeah, yeah.
And it was totally worth it because, yeah, now, I mean, weirdly, I never thought I'd say I worked for an investment firm, but that's also, an interesting thing that I have a business background and I work for them because it's cool to hear about other people's job all the time, what they're doing and investing. And that world is crazy right now, but
Right. So how do you go about creating a menu for 20 other people? I'm
Mhm.
guessing you do it on like maybe a weekly basis or whatever. How do you go about picking out, like what recipes you're going to use or what flavors
Mhm.
you're going to put into your menus?
So I when I started working, I asked them what, kind of food they like and what was sort of their aim for what they wanted out of that, and just like anyone would say, we're open to most cuisines, pretty much anything, but just make it healthy. We don't want to have like fried food every day and dripping in butter every day, but you know, you know what we like and we want to make sure there's a protein for everyone, vegetarian and non-vegetarian. So I usually pick a cuisine or sort of, and I'd say like a cuisine, but it's not always just like American or Mexican. It's sort of like a meal. So I usually center it around a protein and then my starch item. So, let's see. Today's menu is going to be a really big Italian chopped salad. And some days I center it around a salad or a soup instead, and that'll be like the main. And then all the other things that go along with it will be a couple of vegetables, a protein or two, and then some sort of grain or starch. So today will be all the leftover bread I have. I'm making it into croutons, which who doesn't like croutons? Yeah, big chopped salad with tons of different veggies, olives and tomatoes, cucumbers, the whole 9 yards. And then some sort of chicken dish. I usually stick with thighs because they don't dry out. And for so many people to cook them, who has time for that? Yeah, different Italian seasonings, roast them in the oven, and then I usually pick some vegetables. I've got tons of broccoli left over, sweet potatoes, do like a roast and grill them on in a pan with lemon and garlic. Just find flavors that sort of already accompany the sort of cuisine you picked. Because I think people get caught up in the idea of like, this cuisine has to stay this cuisine. And, Italian food has lots of garlic, lots of herbs. So I just, stick with that area and not really feel like I need to stick to a special dish. And so, balsamic is Italian and red wine vinegar is Italian, lemons, just sort of stick with those flavors. And any combination of those together is going to be good, no matter how
Mhm.
you put it. So I usually start my meals that way of saying like, what kind of flavors do I want? Not necessarily cuisine. And then, yeah, pick a protein, pick a grain, pick a vegetable or two, a salad, and go from there.
Do you do the same cuisine or same flavor type every day for a week, or do you change it up every single day?
I usually change it every single day. I'll pick 5 of, like 5 kinds, I guess I would say, for the week. Do a couple different Asian cuisines because everybody loves Asian food and, that's anything from Thai, Indian, Vietnamese, Chinese, the whole Japanese. So a couple of those, even Indian, and then I'll do an American, one day, like a soup and salad, which is always a healthy and good pick for lunch. And then, yeah, anything in between there because, Italian's good. French is hard because they just have so much butter and everybody wants butter. But yeah, it's sort of like I actually use, Plenty as the app, and I save my recipes, some ones that I write myself and plenty of ones from everywhere else. And so I'll look through that and just get some inspiration. I have pretty much every Bon Appetit from like the last 10 years. And so I usually when I'm really starved for ideas, I'll sort of leaf through it. I keep menus from restaurants. Every restaurant I go to that has a paper menu that I can keep, I ask for it, mark it up, and then keep them for future reference. You don't need the recipes, but it's nice to just have an idea, right?
That is a great idea to keep menus from restaurants.
I have a little folder. It's awesome. And then I actually, I mean, more recently too, a lot of restaurants change their menus like every few weeks, months. If I go back there, they're not going to have the same thing again. And so, and they recycle their menus out. Having worked in restaurants, I know they reprint like menus every few hours. They get dirty. So you don't feel like you're really taking much from that. And they're always happy to see, people interested. So it's a nice thing to have just like a collection of ideas always sitting there. So
Yeah, that's a really great idea. You talking about those flavors though makes me think of read the book Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat.
Salt, fat, acid, heat, one of my
Yeah.
favorites.
Yeah, and, she talks in there a lot, like, she basically makes these pinwheels of, like, here's, like, a type of cuisine, and here's all the possible flavors that could be involved in that type of cuisine, and it was really eye-opening to be like, "Okay, so, yeah, like, an Italian cuisine isn't just, like, 5 flavors, it's, like, 50 flavors that you could put in to
Exactly.
create, this
Mhm.
specific cuisine." So, if
Yeah.
anybody really wants some great practical ways of, like, putting flavors together, that book is awesome.
I think that's the second step. So the whole menu, I would say you pick flavors and a cuisine, sort of, and then each item that you make should have a little bit of those elements of the salt, fat, acid, heat. When people are
Mm,
worried about how to season something, I usually say something always needs, salt, fat, acid, and heat of some kind. I don't always think it needs to be spicy necessarily because heat can be misconstrued as that. But whether it's a hot dish or a cold dish or pepper versus spicy, you want a little bit of that. So and that's what makes a balance of anything that tastes good. So
mhm.
really good. I would say resource even for any chef, professional or otherwise.
Yeah, honestly, her story kind of mimics yours a little bit in the way that she,
Mhm.
like, worked in a restaurant for a really long time before
Yep.
she decided to be a little more classically trained, and I bet that most people who are great chefs have so much of that practical experience before
Mhm.
actually going and, like,
Yeah.
learning how to apply those things.
I think a lot of chefs are a certain mindset too that culinary school is a waste of time and money. A lot of them would think that just working in a restaurant will give you all the experience you need. I had more than one chef tell me that. They were like, if you want to work here, just, work for us full time. You don't need to go to school, just quit school. And I wanted to go to school because I wanted to be immersed in it all the time. But it's definitely, that hands-on experience that you're in all the time will get you so much knowledge that you'll never learn in any school.
Mhm,
And that makes a difference. Tell people are like, I'm not good at cooking, but practice makes perfect. It really does.
mhm.
Yeah, I think a school is maybe not right for everyone, but, like, a school was right for me. I'm gonna go back
Yep.
to my photography thing. School was right for me in that way, but and it's like a combination of the hands-on, like, I couldn't be a photographer with never having picked up a camera, and so there's, like, this dual aspect of, like, the school part was really good for me because I liked the community aspect and the immersed aspect and
Mhm.
even the critiquing, having other people
Yeah.
see what I did or in your case, taste what you made and
Mhm.
give you back on it. To me, that's really beneficial for the way that I learn. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, so for some people, just being in a kitchen all the time is probably the right course, but
Yeah.
not for everyone because school could be really beneficial for other people. Just
Yeah.
depends on the way that they learn and the way that they want to take
Exactly.
on their career or whatever it is.
I've always been a bit of a nerd, I should say. Always really liked being in school. I like to read a lot. I like to do all the stuff that school involves. There are plenty of people in my culinary school class that were not good students, and they graduated just fine, if not even better than me as chefs, just because that's not the way that they're used to learning. So I think the hands-on is definitely a different but equally important approach. And to me, culinary school was very all-encompassing of a lot of different practices versus a specific restaurant with a specific cuisine. And it was like, 9 to 5, like all day you're just in it. With a we had to cook the same kind of steak like 10 times to get practice at it. And that might not have been something I got practice at in a restaurant because you're cooking for somebody at that point, and that's, like, a very stressful thing for me on the line of learning. I was like, "Oh, no, someone's actually gonna eat this." So, yeah, I think that made a difference for me.
I could see that. I could, for me, yeah, I would feel the same way. I've never cooked this before. I'm not gonna cook it for somebody else. I'm gonna cook it for
Exactly.
me first, see if it's okay, and then I'll make it for somebody else.
My sister, God bless her, loves to tell people all the time that, like, I really was not always a good cook. She's like, "Trust me, I've had that bread that you made that was like a brick." It was terrible. And, we all have those stages. Like, even as chefs today, there's some stuff that I make that's just not good. You have to practice a lot of things to make it turn out well. You have to test a lot of things. And so you have to just be okay with that. Some things are not going to be good.
Nothing like a sibling to keep you humble.
Yep, always. She'll never let me forget that one.
It makes me feel good though that you say that not everything that you make turns out well, because I just had experience a couple weeks ago where I made dinner that was not good. We actually
Not
ended
good.
up throwing it away and
No.
eating, like scavenging in our refrigerator instead. And my husband was like, "It's okay. Like, we've been together for how many years? And like, there have been so few times that we've actually thrown away the food that you've made."
Mhm.
Like, this is true, but there's something about cooking. And I don't know if it's just because it's like, it's something that you're giving to somebody else, like, you're
Yep,
like, the focus is on, like, I'm nourishing you, I'm providing this
yep.
for you, that, like, when it goes wrong, it is such
Let
a
down.
painful experience.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And part of it too, you often feel like, "Oh my god, I just wasted food too." Like, I put so much
totally.
effort in it, and it was for nothing. It breaks you down a little bit.
Mhm.
This is that heart thing. This is that you put your heart into it. You tried to do something.
Absolutely.
I don't know, it's consuming something, giving something to somebody else to consume feels different
Mhm.
Totally.
than, it's not like giving somebody a t-shirt and being like, here, I got
No.
you a present, and then it not fitting them
Yeah.
very well. You're like, oh, bummer. Well, I guess we can figure that out. You
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
fix it. You can't, there's no result. Like, I mean, like there's some ways you maybe could save a
Mhm.
recipe once it's already served, but
Yeah.
they're
Not
limited.
not as often, yep.
Right. Yeah, but you can't, yeah, it's just that heart thing. You put so much into it, they're gonna consume it. It's like a
Yep.
doesn't last long, it's a short-term gift. There's so many elements of it that's like go down the heart and
Yep.
the like what goes into it, the
Perfect.
emotional aspects of cooking, because I would love to know more. And this conversation is just backing that up.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
In the same vein, I think most commonly I try to reuse my leftovers. Like if, we happen to have a day when people work from home a lot and then I made food and like nobody was there, I most common Google searches are how can I repurpose so and so because I want to make sure that I'm not wasting any food all the time. And it's a hard thing, but the internet's a good place for Google's pretty helpful. I think everyone's most common one was Thanksgiving is like, how do I repurpose all my leftovers? And I think I made turkey sandwiches, and then someone was like, make a soup, and then we made like burritos. There's so much to do with it. But then after 2 times, you're like, I'm tired of eating this.
Our coworker Shelby actually, with her Thanksgiving leftovers, makes like egg rolls, basically. Like, she buys like the egg roll
Ooh,
paper and then like
well,
puts
well,
turkey and a couple, I don't know, like vegetables or maybe like the stuffing or something in the roll, and then she dips it in gravy and cranberry sauce.
really, really fantastic idea.
Sounds really good.
Yeah.
That is the most unique repurposing I've ever heard for
I
Thanksgiving
know, it's so
leftovers.
creative.
And you get
Yeah.
like the crunch with all the soft stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything in an egg roll is good.
What would you say is your number one favorite thing to cook?
Oh,
Okay, it doesn't have to be number 1, it could be in the top 20 because as a chef, I'm sure you've got a long list.
I would say the most favorite thing for me to make is probably one of the most favorite things for me to eat, which is usually Mexican food. Enchiladas are big. Like, it's one of those things that takes you so long to make and you put so much into it, but the end result is so worth it after doing all that work. And I mean, I'm from San Diego, so I grew up on plenty of Mexican food. And yeah, it's partly nostalgic and partly just like this is the good food that I want to eat all the time. So yeah, both eating and making. That's one of my favorites, I would say.
I'm a big Mexican food fan too.
Any Mexican if we're really gonna come down to it, but enchiladas specifically.
Do you
Yeah.
make your own homemade enchilada sauce, or are you okay with just the canned enchilada
I
sauce?
often make my own, but making my own is a lot of work. So, and I actually grew up on the canned and jarred sauce. So sometimes I'll take the canned sauce and just doctor it to be my own. You can add plenty of seasonings to it. Sometimes the canned one is spicy. Add some tomatoes. You can easily make a canned sauce like phenomenally restaurant level if you just add some stuff to it. So yeah, a little bit of both.
I've
Yeah.
tried to make my own homemade enchilada sauce before, and it was a lot of work. And I felt like I think whatever I did the like spices never quite dissolved, so it's like a little bit grainy.
Yeah, you get the
So it
grain.
was, yeah, it was not I pretty much stuck with canned since then because it wasn't a successful experience for me.
I think I've found a lot of recipes that they were asking for a lot of those dried chilies, and while they're easy enough to find the dried chilies, to work with them is like a whole ordeal because of the seeds and blending and all of that. And so I've definitely mixed recipes that I found and adjusted them to become my own because a
Mhm.
simple recipe just didn't cut it for me.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you happen to have so you talked about food processor before not having one, but do you have a favorite cooking tool or like the cooking tool that you would recommend to everybody? Like this is the thing that's
This is the thing.
the life changer?
Ooh, it's somewhere between the NutriBullet or like a blender, like in the Vitamix blender. I do everything in that little NutriBullet. I mean, it's a tiny one, it's old. I mean, the Vitamix has one of those too, so it's pretty awesome. But that little thing can get you so far and so
Mm.
fast. Everything from smoothies to chopping garlic to dressings and, every kind of sauce under the sun. Like I do everything in that. I even grind pepper and coffee in that thing. So it's amazing,
Wow,
which
really versatile.
I
Yeah.
don't always recommend the coffee because the coffee will taste like whatever you had in there before. So you just make sure you wash it really thoroughly first. But everything else, it's probably the number one tool I use for sure.
I've actually made whipped cream in mine,
Oh, that's a good idea.
which I know is like if there's a professional baker, maybe even you thinking that is totally inappropriate, but it
No.
makes it in about 25 seconds.
Yeah.
It is
I
kind of amazing.
I'm someone asked me that recently, like the hand blender was broken and I just stuck the whipped cream and the sugar in a deli container with something with a lid that seals well. I just shook it up for like 5 or 10 minutes and it made whipped cream. It was
Yeah.
like the equivalent, right?
Mhm.
There's the solution for everything.
Well, let's see. So for the home chef, the NutriBullet Vitamix situation is a really great tip and also a really great kitchen tool. Do you have any other things that come to mind that you would suggest for somebody who's just trying to be a better cook at their
Mhm.
house?
Yeah. I A lot of recipes that any recipe that you find in New York Times, Bon Appetit, all those magazines and, professional outlets that will publish recipes, they're often using diamond crystal kosher salt or some version of kosher salt. And that messes up a lot of people's measuring when they're measuring for salt in their recipes. The only thing about that salt, if it's important to you, it's not iodized, but otherwise, that salt is the one that will probably get you exactly the flavor that, that recipe was looking for. And so I think, that's the number one problem with people being like, it's not salty enough, it's not salty, or it's too salty. And that's a number one tip is always like adjust for that. And I would recommend buying that salt. You get it in a big box and it lasts you forever. Um, Another tip is make sure your oils are good. They actually do go bad. People forget that your oils have an expiration date and they will go rancid. And that's probably a reason why it doesn't end up as good as you want. So just check that your expiration date, it actually does mean something on the oil, and make sure you're not burning your oil. They have a lot of different oils that are not meant to be super high heat or fried in. Those are my number two tips, I would say, number one and two. Beyond that, I would say that everything can be substituted. Butter can be substituted for another kind of oil. Any vinegar you have, it says that you need this specific type of vinegar, it can be substituted for another vinegar. And the only way that you'll know is to test it, but in your own recipe as what you're doing, but definitely don't feel stressed about that.
Those
Yeah.
are great tips. I feel like we could have a whole episode about salt because
Oh, we
Yeah.
could.
there's some that are saltier than others. And like you just said, that is what they use. And if you're
Mhm.
looking for that exact thing, salt is a key player in recipes a lot of the
Everything.
time.
Most
Yeah.
of the time when people say, like, it's missing something, it's probably missing salt. That's, like, the number one thing. I go to any person's house, anyone that asks me that question, I'm like, "Did you put enough salt?" And I think the tip that I found most helpful in culinary school too was when you're cooking and you're throwing a bunch of different things into the pot, every time you throw something in the pot, puts just enough salt for that one thing.
Mm.
Salt for each item. instead
Oh,
of putting a bunch
interesting.
of salt all at once. Because how are you going to know if you're just adding like that little pinch? And I never use a spoon. I'm a hand pincher, but you just put enough salt to salt that one thing. And then when you add something else, salt that too. When you add something else, salt that too. If you're salting, if you're going to put a piece of meat in the pan, salt that first and put it in the pan. Um, and I think that's the best way to go about that, because that's how you know you're putting exactly enough for everything in that you're making in that pot or pan.
This is kind of silly, but I just started thinking about you measuring salt with your hand and not with a spoon. And I would guess that you like just know, it feels a certain way in your hand.
It's
Like as an expert in that department,
it's
you're
so
like, oh
weird.
no, I just do it. And this
It's
is what
so
I do.
weird, but the thing when we learned that in culinary school, they were like, "You don't use a spoon." They were like, "You don't sit down there with a recipe all the time. When you're in a restaurant kitchen, you just salt." And my mom makes fun of me all the time. She's like, "Why don't you have a spoon in the salt?" But I can't with the spoon. It doesn't I feel it. I
You
feel
feel
it.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And another reason they use that diamond crystal kosher salt is that it's grainy. It has like, they're all different shapes, the pieces of salt, so it stays in your hand. The round table salt is round and just falls out of your hand, and that doesn't work.
Mm.
So yeah, there's a science behind that salt.
Well, there's a reason why in the salt, fat, acid, heat that salt is the first thing,
First
number
thing.
one, like
Mhm,
it's the first thing on the list. And there's a whole section.
mhm,
Yeah, like if anybody listening is confused about salt, seriously go read that book.
mhm.
That chapter in and of itself was the most eye-opening thing for me to
Yep.
become a better at-home cook. Like salting your meat ahead of time, like, like
Mhm,
hours before you start cooking to like bring out the flavors of things. Yeah, not using iodinized table salt because it gives like a metallic-y flavor to your
mhm.
food. Like so many things about salt, but salt, I think, is the thing that changes recipe, like, the thing
Changes.
that's gonna change a recipe the most is, like, what kind of
Yep.
salt you use and how much salt you well, all the things with salt.
Yep. She has a Netflix episode too if nobody's keen on reading,
Oh,
but she
yeah.
explains all that in the Netflix episode too. It's just a single episode on the salt. I think it's also important people forget that, like, some of your ingredients are salty too. Like, your
Mm.
fish is already kinda salty, it comes from the sea. Soy sauce is already salty, you don't need more salt always if you add that, or miso, something like that. That stuff's already super salty. Celery is naturally really salty. You don't need tons of salt when you add those things. Or your seasonings, if you buy prepackaged, like, mixes, a lot of them already have salt in them. So I would add those and then taste before you add more salt, because that's what's gonna be, like, crazy salty. Yeah. It's salt is an entire we could make episodes, multiple
Yeah.
episodes about salt.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, so this episode's gonna be coming out close to Valentine's Day. For anybody who cares, who's listening, who cares? Do you Mira, do you have, a recommendation for maybe a great, like, at-home date night recipe that, you make that just seems to always turn out really well?
So, I think there's the easiest recipe that has the least number of ingredients that is the most impressive on Valentine's is actually French onion soup. It literally
Ooh.
has, like, 5 or 6 ingredients. If you're not keen on the onion texture, like my own boyfriend, I would blend the onions because there's a place here that does, like, a blended onion soup, and it's fantastic. But it feels really impressive once you sit down with it. You don't need a lot of bread. You need, like, that one really big piece of crusty bread on top with a big mountain of cheese. It feels super decadent because 'cause you're using butter and the broth and all of that. It feels impressive even though you didn't have to do that much work for it, and it's really, really, really comforting, especially, like, it's, still winter, February, you wanna be cozy, and you're not eating a steak to be, like, super bloated or heavy afterwards, you wanna fall asleep. It's the sort of perfect medium. Yeah.
That's a great recipe.
Yeah.
And I
Um,
really like the suggestion to blend it because I think that can be a
Mhm.
lot of people's hesitations with
yep.
French onion soup. So
Onions. It's just a texture thing, and I actually think the blended one tastes better because it's all in there. You're not getting,
Mhm.
like, a specific bite of broth and onion, they're separate. You're just getting it all in one, and that tastes a lot better.
That's a fantastic tip. I think I've only ever made French onion soup one time, and it was easy, but I
Mhm.
did feel like I made this, really
Yeah,
fancy
it
recipe.
gets
Like, I'm so
fancy.
excited for other people to eat it and like it.
Mhm. And I recently tested it with the vegetarian broth version too. You can add a couple ingredients like soy sauce or like mushrooms or something to add that sort of umami that you don't get from beef broth. Still pretty amazing and still equally easy to do for, vegetarian option. So yeah, it's
That's
one of
awesome.
my favorite foods too. Like really, I'd be happy with that French onion soup all the time.
Well, this might be redundant, but we end every episode by asking people what they're something that they ate recently or made recently that they really, really enjoyed. So, I mean, give us another recipe. That's what this episode's about.
Let's see. I went to a place recently in Santa Ana over here. It's called Detention, which is actually really funny because it used to be called Playground. Now it's called Detention. I don't know what prompted the change in name, but they had a really cool menu of a bunch of different variety, of foods. It wasn't all one kind of cuisine, but they had this really incredible two dishes, I would say. One was this sweet potato, and it was a Japanese white sweet potato that was just roasted, but they made this sort of sesame like tahini sauce to go over it. It was so good. And they sauteed some like garlic broccoli and put that over the top. And it definitely felt like there was a lot of butter in there somewhere. So that was really yummy too. But it seemed like something pretty simple to recreate, just, roast your sweet potato in some butter, add that tahini sauce over it, add like a squeeze of lime or something, and then your veggies. And that could be a whole meal on its own, even though it's just a side dish. Something that's fairly healthy too, minus the butter maybe. And then the other dish was this mushroom toast. And I think they were trying to recreate mushrooms into like a fake bacon. But they roasted these oyster mushrooms to be super crispy and almost have a chewy texture like bacon might. And it was smoky, so they must have added smoked paprika or some sort of, liquid smoke option that you can get. And they made, it said egg emulsion, which I have to do a little more research and science behind what that is exactly. But it was definitely a bit of like a cheesy egg sauce that they made over the top on this piece of toast that just had like a big piece of provolone grilled to it. They put the cheese on it, grilled it right on the pan with the cheese touching the pan so that it got all crispy. And then they just took that as the toast. It was like a very weird but fancy mushroom toast dish. It was so good. And I would just eat that over and over again. Like I could eat that for breakfast all the time.
Yeah. That sounds like a really unique place to go eat.
Yeah, they had like Peruvian, if you've ever had lomo saltado, which is like the French fry steak dish. They had a lot of unique stuff on the menu. It's definitely a place I snagged the menu from to keep.
Nice.
But it was cool. It was nice to try some new stuff. They had like a sticky toffee pudding for dessert, which was also amazing. The whipped cream was salted and not sweetened, which was a unique touch, I thought, for something that's so sweet. Yeah, so unexpected. You take a bite of whipped cream and you're like, oh, I really thought that was gonna be sweet. But sticky toffee pudding has that like caramelly sauce over it, which is so sweet. And the salty whipped cream went so well with it. It was just a really like I didn't expect it, but it tasted so good. The balance, salt. Back to the salt. So
Yeah.
Well, this conversation has been awesome. I feel like we could talk forever just about salt, just about recipes. So thanks for taking some time and chatting with us today.
Yeah, thank you guys. It's been really fun. Hopefully I can take you guys to Detention one day.
Yeah.
We'd love that. We'd love it.
California.
We'll be right over.
Yeah.
I'll be waiting.
Thank you so much, Meera.
Thank you guys. Really great talking to you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Plant Eat podcast. We love hearing different approaches to food, and we hope that you enjoy hearing it too.
We would love to invite you to find all the recipes mentioned on the Plant Eat podcast in our podcast account on Plant Eat. You can go to planteat.com/PTE pod. That's PTEPOD. And the variety of recipes that you've heard about and the variety of eating types that we talk about, those can all be found in that account.
Thanks again for listening.